Over the many years that I've been growing plants, one of the things that keeps coming up in conversation time and time again is the importance of water. It makes sense. It's one of the things that sustains our plants. Stick around with me, and in this video, I want to dive through the top 5 things that I've learned over the years that have been a bit of a game changer for me. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, over the years, many years at this point, I've become acutely aware of the importance of water to growing happy, healthy houseplants. And it might seem like the most basic of things. And yes, it can be. However, I think adjusting for certain things when it comes to plants or tropical plants specifically, rather than just going for the default, I'm going to use distilled water, or I'm going to use reverse osmosis water, or I'm just going to use rainwater, any of these things, but maybe that extra bit of thought would have been useful to me over the years. And in essence, this video is something that I would have loved to have seen years ago when I was first starting off, or actually even more recently in my planty journey, to just kind of go, I haven't thought about that. Yeah, that's probably something that I need to be paying attention to, because it can make a big difference when it comes to how I care for my plants. So without further ado, let's dive into the first one. So the first one might not come as a surprise to anybody, because I have been brandishing this poor fern for quite some time on my channel. There's also, and let me bring it up, there's also my staghorn fern. And by the way, for anybody that was there last year at the workshop at Malvern Spring Festival, this is the little demonstration one. It's doing super well. And I'm getting some of the shield fronds as well. Let me bring it up a bit closer so you can kind of see, and hopefully it will focus. But yes, ferns, especially for all the fern lovers out there, they don't have to be challenging. Because I know when people think watering, or when they think of challenging plants when it comes to watering, ferns are one of the first few things that come to mind. And at least in my humblest of opinions over the last few years, these are not as complicated as people might think when it comes to their watering needs, especially if you go for something that is meant to be, and I've said this before, and I do encourage you all to go and have a look if you want to grow some ferns, epiphytic ferns. These are both examples of epiphytic ferns. I've also got my crocodile fern. That is also an epiphytic fern. Have grown that plant like rubbish over the years because I kept it in the growers media. I gave it fern soil mix. I kept it in pots. I did all the things that I was meant to do because it's a fern. The moment that I've put it on a mount is the moment that it's growing like the clappers. Same thing with a blue star fern, same thing, and obviously with most people when it comes to staghorn ferns, they would actually mount them. But that in itself should tell you something, because this plant is in the chunkiest of aroid soil mixes. This is in the same soil mix that I would have an anthurium or even an orchid. Same thing for this, same thing for the crocodile fern. Do these dry out super quickly? It depends. So this one will probably, even now, will probably go for about a week before it needs some watering, and I let it go bone dry. A fern going bone dry. Same thing, roughly maybe a few more days for the big crocodile fern. This one, as we're coming into the warmer months, I'm seeing that when it used to be every 5 days, it might need watering every 3 days, every 4 days now. Does it look like it's got any form of a problem? By the way, this was tiny. Some of these original fronds, this is how small it was, and this is everything that's happened since then. Ferns do not have to be as challenging when it comes to watering as people might think they are. Now, I will say this quickly because I know that I've got some of my Greek viewers that are watching this as well that have sometimes struggled with ferns as well. It is going to be location specific. So that's another little side tip when it comes to things like ferns and watering of ferns. Be aware of your kind of environment. Most people tend to be, but also realize that sometimes if something is difficult in a wet location, it's probably, and that's kind of closer to what it's expecting to get, and you're growing it in a drier condition, you are literally you are playing the game on expert level. And if you can do it well, kudos to you. If you don't do it well, do not kick yourself. because you are literally trying to grow something in an entirely different condition. So I don't know if this is such an extreme example, but it's like trying to grow a cactus in the Arctic. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a bit too extreme of an example, but it's kind of giving similar vibes. Like if you can do it and it can keep it happy, big kudos to you. So it is one of those things, and it is also one of those things that I don't know why ferns are one of those things that people assume that they can grow it everywhere. And it's true, you can, but it's just going to be more challenging. It's the same thing that not everybody that can grow a cactus or a succulent is aware that they can grow a cactus or a succulent. Some people that maybe live in very dark parts of like maybe Northern Europe, for example, they know that if they're going to grow a cactus and a succulent, they're going to struggle because the daylight hours aren't there. So they're going to have to supplement with a grow light. Same thing goes if you're growing something like a fern. You might need a more moisture retaining soil. Even if you're growing an epiphytic fern, it might mean that you still do everything that I was talking about before, letting it dry out and all these things. But in your environment, it might just look like what I was talking about before, every 5 days, every 7 days, every 3 days, might look daily to you. So you might be watering that plant on a daily basis. And as long as you're okay with that, you're fine. The next big thing that I've learned, and this is not glamorous in any way or form, but it is something that a lot of people don't do. And even people that have been growing in their collection for a very long period of time have never bothered to do. Some of them can do it successfully. Some of them that kind of reach a ceiling and they just go, why can't I get my plants to just be as perfect as they can be? Check your area's water hardness, especially if you are watering directly from a tap, which a lot of people still do water from a tap. So things like, there are usually either free websites online or even your water supplier might have a hardness rating or a number that it can give you based on how hard the water is in your location. And I'll give people a bit more of an example if they don't understand what water hardness is. So if you, and I'm in a great location because in this, the UK generally tends to have harder water than a lot of other countries. But my specific area in the UK, and I've learned this recently, bit of a story time, by somebody who came to install a shower in the house. They were just like, they test those showers in this part of the UK because we have got some of the hardest water from all of the country. So they test it to make sure that it works here. And by hard water, I mean, if you ever in like your kitchen sink or your bathroom sink or anything like that, and you can see limescale, so this kind of white hard material that forms after a while around your taps. And depending on how hard your water is, it depends on how aggressively that grows or how fast that accumulates. If you've got harder water, you'll get more limescale and faster around your kind of taps and everything like that. If you've got softer water, and it's to do with minerals basically in the water, if I'm not mistaken, or calcium potentially, you'll still see that happen potentially, but maybe you'll get that limescale building up on your sink once a year. Whilst in my location, if that's not cleared up at least once a week, it can become quite unsightly basically. But think for a second that that is also the water that you are putting into the roots, into the soil, into whatever substance that you're growing. Even with semi-hydro, that's something that you need to consider because that is going to affect how that water is going to behave in that growing media and by the roots as well. And you also need to be aware that depending on how quickly that limescale can build up on things, that might also be building up to a certain point around some of your plant roots. The other element that you need to be thinking of there is things like, have you got a water softener? I was successfully watering my collection and I knew the risk that I was taking by doing this, watering all my plants from the tap of a house that had water softening system throughout the entirety of the house, which meant that that still had higher levels of a certain type of salt. So it didn't have limescale, but it had higher levels of salt. The other thing that you need to be cognizant of, and this is something that you might not always get, is what the chloramine, I think that's the right word, is that's in your water. So something that a lot of people, again, might not know. My father for many years was relatively kind of like, I think he was one of the managers in the water board back home, basically. And I grew up knowing way too much about tap water than you would even begin to imagine. And I can usually tell from my father, because there are most countries in the world that he will just happily just order tap water and drink tap water. If we are somewhere and my dad is sitting there going, can I get a bottled water, please? Because I do not want the tap. That to me, from somebody whose job it was to bear in mind not just his own countries, but around the world, I'm just like, oh, okay, that's good to know. Is that like the person who has been doing this for a living would not drink this tap water? That should tell you something. So check as much as you can. As I said, the hardness of your water is probably going to be something that your water supplier should be at least disclosing on their website, and if not, you should be able to reach out and find out, and it needs to be location specific. So I'll give you an example for the vastness that is the United States. The water in your specific city, within your specific state, within the whole of the US is going to be different. So something in the water in California is probably going to be drastic, I'm assuming here, it's going to be drastically different from the water in New York. Flip side of that is if somebody in Napa in California, their water might be very different from somebody from Santa Barbara, for example. So even within your own state or within your own nation, your location matters, because it depends, because different locations might have sources of water. Their municipal water might be coming from different areas or from different kind of treatment plants, so to speak. So it's gonna be different. Check specifically for your area. And a little bonus tip, if you move to a different location, state, town, city, that you think there might be a difference, it's far away enough that it might be different, please remember to recheck what the water situation is where you are, because that will make a big difference, because you're just like, this house is exactly the same as my previous house. Why are things different? Because the water is different. And I know that people are going to be going on about distilled water and reverse osmosis water and rainwater. Now, few things, bugbears for me on that. Not everybody has access to rainwater. Not everybody's rainwater is of great quality. Let's put it that way, because like I've seen a lot of people whose water butts, the inside of those water butts, do not look great. So there might be other things that you're introducing in with the water. Yes, that is possibly going to be the purest water that you can give your plants, because it comes directly from the sky. I'm not going to touch on acid rain, or if you're in specifically like industrial areas, that might be another issue altogether. Same thing with distilled water. There's a lot of process that comes to making that distilled water as well. So think about the environment that we're getting these plants from as well, and us not polluting our world any more than we absolutely have to. And I've got a reverse osmosis machine, and the reason why I don't use it as frequently, I don't feel like I need to, but also before you buy anything like a reverse osmosis machine, especially because those filtration systems, the ones that are connected to taps, by the way, I'm talking about now, do some research and see, because I was gobsmacked when I ran my reverse osmosis machine for the first time on how much water is wasted in order to create that reverse osmosis water. It's something that's going to be very difficult to explain, but watch some videos and you'll understand what I mean. There's a lot. So if you're going to be doing something like that and you want to be using that, find things that you can use potentially some of that wasted water, so it's not just going down the sink for no reason, just so you can get a small amount of reverse osmosis water. Bear that in mind. The other big thing that I've learned over the years, and this might come as no surprise to anybody, is watering frequency. And it generally is less watering. I know, shocking, because we've not all been talking about this for a while, but I think it still deserves to be said. I will say this until I am blue in the face. Overwaterers and underwaterers will both get issues with their plants. Overwaterers, I'm including myself because I still consider myself an overwaterer, will get substantially more dangerous issues with their plants. As in dangerous, I mean that more likely to kill your plant and kill it fast versus an underwaterer. And this links in with the other kind of thing that I've learned. So this is kind of a joined thing, two in one, which is start paying attention to the watering levels that you have in the winter versus the summer. And it's not always the case I'm talking about, because obviously if a plant's getting watered maybe every 5 to 7 days in the summer, you might be watering it every 15 to 20 days in the winter. That's absolutely fine. That's not what I'm trying to talk here. Think, especially for like the northern hemisphere, as we're coming into like the middle part of spring and coming into summer now, I beg you to pay attention to your plants at the point of watering. I know we're all going to be frantically going around and watering plants because it gets busier in the summer and there's more things to do, but pay attention to the moisture level of whatever growing media you have in the summer by the time you've watered. And 9 times out of 10, you will notice that that plant might either be or be very close to being bone dry. Now think back to the winter when you're maybe watering that same plant every 15 days. Is it truly at the same level of dryness as you would in the summer because it happens naturally, regardless of whether or not you're watering more frequently? And then the next step further past that is, in the realest of terms in the winter, actually getting it to the same level of dryness as you would do automatically in the summer, because things just get thirstier in the summer, and letting it sit within that region for a couple of extra days, if not a bit longer sometimes, will be hugely beneficial. I've had to learn this the hard way because I either don't adjust my watering fast enough when the seasons change in autumn towards winter as well, in that kind of summer to autumn to winter time, but also that I don't let the plants get dry enough. Nobody ever talks about how dry plants need to get in the winter, because especially if something isn't doing much and they're not actively growing, and even if they're actively growing, because everybody just like, if they're actively growing, keep watering it. Yes, with measure. It doesn't mean flood the plant more frequently because you've seen a single leaf in 6 months come out of your plant. It just means that that's finally got a bit of energy, and maybe it's kind of realizing a bit of a seasonal shift that you haven't seen yet. Just kind of going, oh, it's been 3 to 6 months now. I think spring is coming. Let's start pushing out some growth. That is not a sign for you to be going, that is an active growth. One plant every 3 to 6 months is not active growth in the winter. It's just something that would happen naturally to the plant. It does not mean keep it moist at all times, because you will then get issues. And can you tell when I'm saying this to you, it's basically like I'm saying this to myself, because these are things that I wished I knew back then and I've had to learn the hard way. And by hard way, I mean a whole bunch of plant deaths, or even plants that don't look absolutely pristine. And I'm hoping to save everybody out there watching this video some grief and some agitation by telling you things that I wish I knew a while back. So yes, so it is that kind of notion that make sure that, obviously, yes, watering frequency throughout the different seasons of the year is going to be different, but pay attention. And there's a reason why I'm saying this now and not in autumn, because you're never going to remember to. But if you're seeing this in autumn, I'm sorry to the southern hemisphere that's going into their autumn now. So I do apologize. But maybe you remember for next year, or maybe you remember because it's just been now. How dry do your plants get in the summer between waterings, just because it happens, because they are thirstier and they get through the water a lot faster? And how dry are you letting them become in the winter? And sometimes that alone as a realization is mind-blowing. And the little tip that I think a lot of people, some people might know, but not a lot of people do, is that depending on what you're using as a fertilizer, that could be your friend. So think about it this way. Certain fertilizers, and I can think of at least the 2 kind of bigger names in the UK at the moment, basically, and I'm not going to name names. There's one that's in a black bottle and there's one that's in a white bottle. I think both of them, if I'm not mistaken, will help with any kind of treatment of the water just by existing within the water, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me down below. But there are certain fertilizers that kind of work to, at least a certain point, negate some of those issues that we were talking about before, the chloramine, the lime scale, the hardness of the water. So for instance, sometimes, and I can talk from my own personal experience that by and large, at least from what I've seen, that tends to be true, basically. They will handle some of that issue with your water, granted, as long as you're not watering your plants with like mucky water generally, but they will help a bit with that. So there is a reason why some people, including myself, will water with a tiny bit of fertilizer throughout the year, at least in my hand. And I know from a chemist's point of view, and if you're a chemist and I'm talking rubbish, please let me know down below. It probably isn't making that much of a difference, but in my head, it's making enough of a difference that I'm not seeing a problem within my plants of just using regular tap water. And I'll be entirely clear, and I've said this time and time again, I always use tap water. I always have done, and I always probably will continue to use tap water just because it's easier. I don't want to be spending a fortune to water my plants. I don't want to be wasting water, like I said before, with only watering with reverse osmosis. And I ain't got no time to be getting. Do you know how much rainwater I would need in order to water all of these damn plants in here? I'd spend half my day going backwards and forwards to the water butt, and the water butt would be, even in the winter when it's constantly raining, that water butt would be running dry within a few days, basically, let alone in the summer when it doesn't rain as often. So, so yes, fertilizer can truly be your friend. I've never really tried the thing that people talk about when it comes to kind of with the chloramine. I don't know if this is more of an issue in the States, because I see a lot of people that live in the US that mention this a bit more. But I don't know how accurate it is of like you fill up your watering containers, like your kind of watering jugs with tap water the night before you water and you let them sit, and some of that would evaporate. I don't even know that's a thing. I've never done it. So I don't know if it's got any efficiency or if it's just kind of old wives' tales. Is that the expression? I don't know. But let us all know down below if you've done that. Does it work? If you're a scientist and you know for a fact that that doesn't work, do let us know. Maybe tell us why if you feel so inclined. You don't have to. But yeah, a lot of these things when it comes to watering, they seem a bit geeky and they seem a bit specific, but I found that they really do help, basically. So as I said, it's that notion of making sure that you know the hardness of your water. If you can find out if there's any chloramine or chlorine or things like that in the water and at what levels, that's going to make a difference, especially if you're growing in semi-hydro, because that's going to affect your pH as well. So if you're doing this, and for the people, so don't get people switching off who don't do semi-hydro, but you might have to use more pH up or pH down in order to kind of sort that out. And that might just be on your baseline watering that you're doing there. The benefit of using something like a fertilizer that can help with the quality of the water as well, making sure that you're letting the plants dry out enough. And this also applies to semi-hydro, because the people that I know that have maybe struggled with semi-hydro 7 times out of 10, I would say, the biggest issue is that they're not letting those plants that are in semi-hydro have enough of a dry period before they water again. That doesn't hold true if you're going for semi-aquatic plants or kind of marginal plants, that's fine. But for a lot of the other plants, they still need to go. I will hearken back to anybody who has used, I think, Lechuza Pond. They used to say this on their website and on their packaging. I don't know if they still do, but they were just like, you need to let the plant dry between waterings. Even the reservoir needs to go dry before you water. And it's not just dry, but dry for a few days past that point. And then you can re-water. So that should tell you something. But it's things like that, making aware of the seasonal differences as well. And again, just on a more positive note, in terms of more specific plants, ferns are not that scary. Ferns, if you do enough research and you find, and it's not even that hard to do the research to find an epiphytic fern, just put the epiphytic, what is an epiphytic fern that is a houseplant, into Google, or if you're using AI, use AI at this point. And it will tell you quite a few options that you're just like, I did not know that. And try growing it as an epiphyte. You would be surprised on how many ferns you could grow. But obviously, again, I'll come back to what I said about location. Make adjustments for the frequency of the watering, maybe not necessarily the substrate or the way of growing it, but make adjustments for the frequency of the watering based on where you are. But yes, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. It's a topic that, oh, for lack of better words, that might be a bit dry, even though we're talking about water. I know, sorry. But I think it deserves to be said. And as I said, this is a video that I would have liked to have seen a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So I'm hoping this is useful to somebody out there and they just go, ah, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, maybe tell us down below, do you agree with any of these? Do you disagree? Do you have your own things that you've learned about water that have worked for you, or things that you thought were a thing but they weren't, and now that you know X thing, your plant care is easier, better, whatever? Let us all know down below and let's have that conversation. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.